A professor stood before the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy. His mission? Simple. Prove that humans were nothing special, that he had charts. He had data. He had 40 years of research. He had absolutely no idea what was about to walk through that door. The Xenological Institute of Advanced Species Studies had witnessed many ridiculous theories presented within its crystalline walls over the centuries. But none, quite as entertainingly wrong as what Professor Zithker Velnosian was about to unleash upon his unsuspecting audience. The building itself seemed to sense what was coming. Its bioluminescent architecture pulsed with what could only be described as anticipatory glee. Professor Velnosian stood 12 feet tall when fully extended, his crystalline form refracting ambient light into prismatic patterns he personally believed made him look distinguished. In reality, it made him look like a very pretentious disco ball. Nobody had bothered to inform him of this fact. His compound eyes swept across the packed auditorium. Representatives from 47 different species all gathered to witness what he confidently believed would be the definitive academic takedown of human mythology. The methane breathers had constructed special atmospheric suits for the occasion. The energy beings had dimmed themselves to avoid causing seizures. Even the notoriously antisocial Silicon Hive Collective had sent a representative, though whether out of genuine academic interest or morbid curiosity remained unclear. In the front row sat Dr. Quiltar Zenvox, a six-armed heliotrope whose expression of barely contained amusement should have served as a warning to anyone paying attention. Unfortunately, Professor Velnosian was far too absorbed in his own brilliance to notice such trivial details. He activated his holographic display with a flourish that impressed absolutely no one. The title materialized across 17 different languages. Debunking Human Mythological Absurdities. A scientific deconstruction of impossible claims. Esteemed colleagues, he began, his voice resonating through specialized translation matrices. Today we shall examine the most persistent and most scientifically implausible mythology to emerge from the third spiral arm. The so-called legends of human capability. A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Human myths had been a source of galactic entertainment for decades, right up there with Centuran soap operas and Andromedan performance art, in terms of their perceived relationship to actual reality. Through rigorous scientific analysis and comprehensive biological modeling, Velnosian continued, his prismatic form cycling through colors that radiated supreme academic confidence. I have conclusively proven that these tales represent nothing more than primitive wish-fulfillment fantasies, grossly exaggerated beyond any reasonable biological parameters. The holographic display shifted to a detailed anatomical breakdown of human physiology. The data painted a picture of a species that was, in every measurable way, thoroughly unremarkable. Average strength, mediocre reflexes, laughably fragile bone structure, and a brain that, while technically adequate, hardly suggested the capacity for the legendary feats attributed to them. Consider, if you will, the myth of human persistence hunting, Velnosian declared, manipulating the display to show a human figure pursuing a creature far larger and faster than itself. According to their folklore, humans can allegedly pursue prey across vast distances through sheer determination, eventually exhausting animals superior to them in every physical category. Several audience members chuckled at the absurdity. The professor's confidence bloomed. Biological impossibility, he stated flatly. Human cardiovascular systems, while adequate for basic survival, could never sustain such prolonged physical exertion. The energy expenditure alone would result in systemic failure within the first few hours. More nods, more notes being taken. The audience was with him completely, which should have been the first indication that something was about to go spectacularly wrong. Then we have, Velnosian continued, clearly warming to his subject, the preposterous notion of human pack bonding. His prismatic form shifted through what could only be described as the colors of academic superiority. Their mythology claims they form emotional attachments to virtually any creature they encounter, including species that pose direct threats to their survival. They allegedly adopt apex predators as companions, nurse wounded enemies back to health, form familial bonds with beings that should logically view them as prey. The display filled with artist renderings of humans interacting with various dangerous creatures, each image more ridiculous than the last. A human child playing with a miniature version of the galaxy's most feared apex predator. An adult human sharing food with a creature whose species had historically consumed human-like beings. A human medic treating the wounds of an enemy soldier mid-battle. Evolutionary nonsense, the professor declared with the kind of certainty that makes the universe laugh. Such behavior would have been selected against within a few generations. No species survives by befriending everything that moves. The audience was fully engaged now. Some taking notes, others nodding along. It all made perfect sense from a scientific standpoint, which of course should have been the second warning sign. Perhaps most absurd of all, Velnosian continued, his form now cycling through full academic glory, are the tales of human ingenuity under pressure. According to their mythology, when faced with impossible circumstances, humans allegedly devise solutions using whatever materials happen to be available, often in ways that violate several fundamental principles of engineering. The display shifted to technical diagrams of impossible contraptions, jury-rigged devices that should never have functioned, repair work performed by someone who had apparently never heard of proper protocols. The myth claims they once repaired a critical life support system using nothing but scavenged parts and something they call percussive maintenance, Velnosian said, his tone dripping with disdain. They allegedly refer to this technique as hitting it until it works, which should tell you everything you need to know about the scientific rigor involved. More chuckles from the audience, even the energy being pulsed with amusement. And then the professor continued, clearly building toward what he considered his masterpiece of debunking. We have the ultimate human myth, their supposed ability to survive in environments that should be instantly fatal, often through what they call stubbornness or spite. The display shifted to scenarios that genuinely seemed impossible. Humans surviving brief exposure to hard vacuum, walking away from crashes that should have been immediately fatal, continuing to function despite injuries that would incapacitate most known species. One particularly ridiculous tale claims that a human once survived for several days in space after their ship exploded, using only their emergency suit and what they described as creative problem-solving and a really bad attitude. Velnosian paused for dramatic effect. The biological impossibilities alone. He never got to finish that sentence. The lecture hall's communications system crackled suddenly to life, filled with static and what sounded distinctly like someone humming an upbeat tune. The interference cleared just enough for a cheerful human voice to cut through the speakers. Hello there. Any friendly aliens in the neighborhood? This is Commander Brick Ironwood of the human vessel, definitely not stolen, requesting emergency assistance. We've had some minor technical difficulties and could use a hand if anyone's got a spare docking bay. The auditorium fell completely silent. Professor Velnosian's prismatic form flickered through colors that suggested confusion mixed with the specific kind of panic that comes from having reality intrude upon a perfectly good lecture. Appears to be an actual human transmission, Dr. Zenvox observed helpfully, all 6 arms folded in a way that suggested he was enjoying this development immensely. Impossible, Velnosien sputtered. There are no human vessels in this system. I checked the traffic manifest personally. The transmission continued, now joined by a second voice with a distinctly different accent. Commander, I've got the quantum flux capacitor jury-rigged with some spare wiring. And that emergency chocolate you've been saving should get us another few hours of life support. Excellent work, Engineer Luna Stormlight. Though I have to ask, what did you use for the stabilizing matrix? Well, you know how the manual says never to use organic compounds in quantum field manipulation? Please tell me you didn't. I used the chocolate. Turns out cocoa has some really interesting properties when exposed to exotic matter. Who knew? Several audience members turned to stare at Professor Velnosian, whose confidence was beginning to develop some distinctly visible cracks. "This is clearly a hoax," he declared, though his voice carried slightly less conviction than before. "Someone is obviously attempting to disrupt my presentation with fabricated transmissions." "Oh, and Commander," the engineer's voice continued cheerfully. "Remember that black hole we skirted to avoid the Voidstalker patrol? Turns out we picked up some hitchhikers. The friendly kind, or the kind that wants to eat us? Bit of both, actually. The crystalline refugees we rescued are very grateful, but they're sharing space with some kind of energy parasite that seems to think we're delicious. I've got it contained for now using a magnetic field generator I built from the coffee machine." "You built a magnetic field generator from the coffee machine?" "Don't worry, it still makes coffee. Had to sacrifice the timer function, but priorities, right?" The color spectrum currently being displayed by Professor Velnosian could charitably be described as academic horror with undertones of existential crisis. "This is becoming absolutely ridiculous," he announced to the auditorium. "Clearly someone has hacked our communication systems." "Institute control to unknown human vessel," came a new voice over the speakers, belonging to the station's traffic coordinator. "Please state the nature of your emergency and current location." "Oh, hey there, Institute Control. Lovely to hear from you. We're currently about 3 kilometers off your port docking array. As for our emergency, well, that's a bit of a story. See, we were en route to the Centauri system when we detected a distress signal from a passenger liner caught in a gravitational anomaly near that black hole cluster in the Vega sector. The Vega Sector black hole cluster is classified as utterly lethal to all known forms of life," the traffic coordinator responded, sounding increasingly confused. "Right. Well, that's what we thought too. But Luna here figured out how to surf the gravitational waves using our emergency thrusters and some creative modifications to our inertial dampeners. Bit bumpy, but we managed to extract all 47 survivors before their ship got spaghettified." Professor Velnosian was now cycling through colors that didn't technically exist in normal space-time, which was probably not a good sign. "You surfed gravitational waves around a black hole cluster?" the traffic coordinator asked weakly. "Had to improvise the approach a bit." Engineer Stormlight chimed in. "Turns out, if you reverse the polarity on the field generators and feed the excess energy back through the navigation computer, you can create a kind of gravitational surfboard effect. The math is actually pretty elegant, once you ignore about half the safety protocols." "You ignored safety protocols while navigating a black hole cluster?" "Only the boring ones. We kept all the important bits about not dying horribly." Dr. Zenvox was now openly laughing, a sound like crystal chimes being played by someone with a wicked sense of humor. "Permission to dock granted," the traffic coordinator said finally, in the tone of someone who had given up trying to make sense of the universe. "Base 7 is available." "Brilliant. We'll be there in a few minutes. Fair warning, though. Our docking approach might look a bit unconventional. Our landing thrusters got damaged during the black hole thing. So Luna rigged up an alternative system using our waste recycling unit and some spare hull plating." "You're using your waste recycling unit for propulsion?" "It's actually surprisingly effective once you adjust the pressure ratios. Plus environmentally friendly." "That's not how environmental friendliness works in space." Details. See you in a few." The transmission cut out, leaving the auditorium in stunned silence. Professor Velnosian stood frozen at his podium, holographic display, still showing neat charts and graphs explaining exactly why everything they had just heard was scientifically impossible. 20 minutes later, the Institute's external sensors detected the approaching vessel. What appeared on the viewing screens defied several fundamental principles of spacecraft design, basic engineering, and arguably good taste. The human ship looked like it had been assembled by someone who had heard spacecraft described secondhand and decided to improvise. Hull plating had been replaced with repurposed cargo containers. The propulsion system consisted of multiple thruster types that had definitely not been designed to work together, along with what looked suspiciously like industrial equipment that was absolutely not supposed to be attached to the exterior of a spacecraft. By the 7 moons of Arcturus, someone whispered from the back of the auditorium. It's actually flying. Flying is a generous term, Dr. Voss observed cheerfully. I'd say it's more like falling with style and excessive confidence. The ship's docking approach could charitably be described as creative. Rather than conventional thrusters, it appeared to be propelling itself using controlled burst from what was unmistakably a waste management system, while simultaneously deploying makeshift grappling hooks to guide its trajectory. That should not work, Professor Velnosian said weakly. The physics alone. And yet, Dr. Voss pointed out with obvious delight, there it is. Working. The ship docked successfully, coming to rest in Bay 7 with a gentleness that suggested either incredible skill or impossible luck. Given everything they'd already witnessed, the audience was beginning to suspect it might be both. The auditorium doors opened. The figure that entered made several audience members instinctively reach for weapons they didn't have. Commander Ironwood stood roughly 6 feet tall, built like someone who had personally arm-wrestled entropy and come out ahead. Their uniform was practical rather than formal, showing signs of recent repair work performed with considerably more enthusiasm than skill. The helmet they removed appeared to have been constructed from spare parts and sheer optimism. "Excuse me," Commander Ironwood said, looking around pleasantly. "I'm looking for the Xenological Institute. We've got some refugees who wanted to speak with your research department." The silence that greeted this was so profound it could probably have been bottled and sold as a meditation aid. "That would be us," Dr. Voss said finally, his amusement barely contained. "We're actually in the middle of a lecture about human mythology. Your timing is rather fortuitous." Commander Ironwood glanced around, taking in the assembled aliens, the holographic displays, and Professor Velnosian's increasingly crystalline equivalent of a panic attack. "Oh, brilliant. We love those. Luna's always saying other species tell stories about us. Says it's flattering. Though I keep telling her they probably make us sound much more impressive than we actually are." Several audience members made choking sounds. "Actually," the commander continued pleasantly, "don't suppose any of you know anything about quantum field stabilization? Luna's got our energy parasite contained, but she thinks the field generator might need proper calibration. She built it from coffee machine parts, and while it works, she's a bit worried about long-term stability." "You built a quantum field generator from coffee machine parts?" asked Dr. Aquilcia Verantox, a crystalline being whose species was renowned throughout the galaxy for their engineering mastery. "Well, Luna did. I just held the flashlight and try not to get in the way. She's got a real gift for making things work that shouldn't. Last week she fixed our FDL drive using galley equipment and some wires she found in a maintenance shaft." Professor Velnosian made a sound, this one distinctly resembling the noise a theoretical framework makes when it collapses under the weight of observable reality. As if summoned, the auditorium doors opened again, admitting a group of beings representing at least a dozen different species. They moved with the careful precision of individuals who had recently had their understanding of the universe fundamentally rearranged and were still processing the implications. At the front walked a tall, elegant crystalline being whose prismatic form cycled through colors, suggesting profound gratitude mixed with existential confusion. They approached Professor Velnosian directly. "Professor Velnosian," the newcomer said, in a voice like wind chimes caught in a philosophical crisis, "I'm Healer Keth Dallas. I believe I've read your papers on human behavioral mythology." Professor Velnosian's form flickered hopefully. Perhaps this was his salvation, a fellow academic who could confirm that everything they'd witnessed was clearly impossible. "Yes," he managed weakly. "I trust you found my analysis compelling." Healer Dallas was quiet for a moment, their crystalline form shifting through the colors of polite academic disagreement. "Well," they said finally, "having spent the last 3 days watching humans do exactly the things your papers claim are impossible, I'm afraid I might have to respectfully disagree with some of your conclusions." The sound Professor Velnosian made at this point defied classification by any known system of acoustic analysis. "You see," the healer continued, addressing the auditorium as much as the professor. When our passenger liner was caught in the gravitational anomaly, we calculated that rescue was mathematically impossible. The forces involved, the radiation levels, the navigational complexity. No known technology could have extracted us safely. They gestured toward Commander Ironwood. And then these humans appeared, in a ship that should never have been able to fly, using techniques that should never have worked, and proceeded to save all 47 of us through what can only be described as weaponized optimism and creative engineering. The engineering wasn't that creative, Commander Ironwood protested mildly. Luna just ignored some of the more pessimistic safety guidelines and focused on the ones about not letting people die horribly. Very practical approach, really. They surfed gravitational waves, Healer Dallas continued, their voice taking on the tone of someone recounting a religious experience. They converted their waste management system into a propulsion device. Their engineer built a quantum field stabilizer from beverage preparation equipment. Coffee machine, Commander Ironwood corrected helpfully, though it still makes excellent coffee. Luna's very proud of that. And when we asked how they knew these impossible techniques would work, the healer continued. Do you know what they said? The auditorium waited with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for natural disasters and academic scandals. They said they didn't know if it would work. They just knew they had to try, because letting people die when you might be able to help isn't really an option. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Professor Velnosian's worldview crumbling into component atoms. But that's not how science works, he whispered. You can't just ignore fundamental physical laws because you feel like helping people. Commander Ironwood tilted their head thoughtfully. Well, no, you can't ignore them. But you can work around them if you're creative enough. Luna always says physics is more like guidelines than actual rules, especially when people are in trouble. Physics, Professor Velnosian exclaimed, his academic distress finally overcoming his paralysis, is not guidelines. Physics is the fundamental structure of reality, right? But reality is pretty flexible if you approach it with the right attitude, the commander replied reasonably. Luna's got this theory that the universe is generally helpful if you're genuinely trying to do something good, even if you have to bend a few rules to make it work. Dr. Zen Vox was now laughing so hard that all 6 of his arms were having difficulty keeping him upright. The auditorium doors opened one final time. Another human entered, uniform recently repaired using techniques that clearly prioritized function over appearance. In her arms, she carried what appeared to be a small, glowing creature that pulsed contentedly like a living lantern. Commander, I've got the refugees settled in their temporary quarters, Engineer Luna Stormlight announced. Also, Sparky here has been helping me recalibrate the quantum field generator. Turns out energy parasites have an intuitive understanding of exotic matter interactions. Who knew? She held up the glowing creature. It pulsed happily and made a sound like a contented electrical discharge. You domesticated an energy parasite, Dr. Varentok said, in the tone of someone confirming something they still couldn't quite believe. Domesticated is a strong word, Engineer Stormlight replied. I'd say we reached a mutually beneficial understanding. Sparky gets regular meals and companionship. In return, it helps maintain our power systems. Very eco-friendly arrangement. Sparky pulsed brighter and made what could generously be described as a happy electrical noise. Besides, the engineer continued, it was obviously lonely. You can't just leave a lonely creature floating in space. Even if it is technically a dangerous energy-based life form that could drain our power systems in minutes if it wanted to. Professor Velnosian made a sound that could only be described as a crystalline being having a complete existential crisis, which was probably exactly what it was. Luna, Commander Ironwood said pleasantly, these fine academic folks were just discussing human mythology. Apparently, there's some debate about whether the stories about us are actually true. Engineer Stormlight looked around the auditorium, taking in the holographic displays, still showing neat scientific explanations for why everything she represented was impossible. Oh, those are nice charts, she said appreciatively. Very thorough. though I think there might be a small error in your calculations about human engineering capabilities. An error? Professor Velnosian asked weakly. You've assumed that humans only use techniques officially approved by recognized engineering authorities, Engineer Stormlight explained. That's not really how we work. We tend to use whatever's available and see what happens. She gestured to Sparky, who pulsed agreeably. Take quantum field stabilization, for instance. Your charts show it requires specialized equipment and precise calibration procedures. And you're absolutely right if you want to do it the proper way. Are there improper ways to perform quantum field stabilization? Dr. Varentox asked, sounding fascinated and horrified in equal measure. Oh, loads of them. Most involve repurposing household appliances and crossing your fingers a lot. This particular setup uses a coffee machine, some wire from a maintenance conduit, and a healthy dose of what I like to call aggressive optimism. Aggressive optimism is not a recognized engineering principle. Professor Velnosian protested feebly. It should be. Engineer Stormlight replied cheerfully. Very effective for getting things to work when they theoretically shouldn't. I've used it to fix everything from life support systems to FTL drives. You used aggressive optimism to repair faster-than-light propulsion systems? Well, that, and some creative interpretations of safety protocols. The manual says never to use organic compounds in quantum field manipulation, but it doesn't specifically mention chocolate, so I figured there was some wiggle room. Several audience members were now making notes, though whether they were recording revolutionary engineering techniques or symptoms of human insanity remained genuinely unclear. The important thing, Engineer Stormlight continued, is to remember that technology wants to work. Most of the time when something breaks, it's just confused about what it's supposed to be doing. You explain it clearly, give it some encouragement, and maybe percuss it gently with a suitable implement, and usually it sorts itself out. Percussive maintenance is not a legitimate repair technique, Professor Velnosian said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Depends on your definition of legitimate, the engineer replied. It's gotten us out of more scrapes than I can count. There's actually a whole art to it. You need to hit the right spot with the right amount of force at the right angle. Too gentle and nothing happens. Too hard and you make things worse. She demonstrated by giving Sparky a gentle pat. The creature pulsed brighter and made a sound of pure, contented electrical happiness. See? Sparky understands the principle perfectly. Commander Ironwood checked what appeared to be a chronometer constructed from spare parts and wishful thinking. Luna, we should probably let these folks get back to their lecture. Don't want to take up too much of their time. Actually, Dr. Zenvox interjected, his amusement now reaching levels probably visible from orbit. I believe our colleague here was just finishing his presentation on why human myths are scientifically impossible. All eyes turned to Professor Velnosian. His crystalline form was now cycling through colors that didn't appear in any known spectrum, and probably weren't supposed to exist in normal space-time. He began, then stopped. Perhaps, Dr. Zenvox suggested helpfully, you'd like to revise some of your conclusions based on this new empirical evidence? Professor Velnosian looked at his holographic displays, still showing neat charts explaining why humans couldn't possibly do any of the things they had just witnessed humans doing. He looked at the refugees, nodding enthusiastically about their impossible rescue. He looked at Engineer Stormlight, having a quiet conversation with an energy parasite that was purring like a satisfied cat. This is not possible, he said finally. None of this is possible. And yet, Commander Ironwood pointed out reasonably, here we are. The universe, Professor Velnosian declared, with the desperate certainty of someone whose fundamental beliefs were being demolished by observable reality, does not work this way. Engineer Stormlight looked thoughtful. Well, maybe the universe is more flexible than we give it credit for. If you approach it with the right attitude, and don't get too hung up on theoretical limitations, it's amazing what you can accomplish. Theoretical limitations exist for good reasons. Sure, but so does helping people when they're in trouble. And when those two things conflict, she shrugged, I know which one I'm going with. Sparky pulsed in what appeared to be complete agreement. The silence that followed was broken by the slow, deliberate sound of Dr. Zenvox applauding, all 6 arms creating a complex rhythm of pure appreciation. "Magnificent," he said. "Absolutely magnificent. Colleague Velnosian, I believe you've just provided us with the finest example of why field research is always superior to theoretical modeling." Professor Velnosian's form was now displaying colors that suggested complete academic breakdown, mixed with the dawning realization that his entire career had just been publicly demolished by 2 cheerful humans and their pet energy parasite. "But my research," he whispered. "My papers. My theoretical framework." "Oh, I'm sure they're very good papers," Commander Ironwood said kindly. "It's just that sometimes reality doesn't read the manual." "Reality should read the manual," Professor Velnosian protested weakly. "Yeah," Engineer Stormlight replied cheerfully. "But it's got better things to do, like making impossible rescues work out and helping lonely energy parasites find new homes." Sparky pulsed happily and made a sound like contentment translated into electricity as the humans prepared to leave, taking their rescued passengers and their impossible pet with them. Professor Velnosian slumped behind his podium, surrounded by holographic displays that now seemed less like scientific achievement and more like monuments to academic hubris. "Well," Dr. Zenvox announced to the auditorium, "I think we can all agree that today's presentation has been highly educational, if not quite in the way we expected." The audience filed out, engaged in animated discussions about everything they had just witnessed. Several were already making notes about the urgent need to revise various theoretical frameworks. Professor Velnosian remained at his podium, staring at his charts and graphs with the expression of someone who had just watched the universe personally vandalize his life's work. "Cheer up, colleague," Dr. Zenvox said, patting him gently with one of his 6 arms. "Think of it this way. You've just participated in one of the most significant academic discoveries in recent history." "What discovery?" Velnosian asked miserably. "The discovery that when it comes to humans, the myths aren't mythology." He smiled. "They're just really good marketing." Outside the Institute, Commander Ironwood helped their passengers prepare for transport, while Engineer Stormlight performed final calibrations on equipment that should never have worked, but somehow did anyway. "Nice place," the commander observed, looking around the pristine academic corridors. "Think they learned anything useful from our visit?" "Hard to say," Engineer Stormlight replied, giving Sparky another gentle pat. "But I think that Professor might need some time to process things. His whole color spectrum went a bit wonky there at the end. Probably just need to adjust his theoretical framework," the commander said charitably. "Happens to the best of us." And as their ship departed, propelled by systems that violated several fundamental principles of engineering while somehow working perfectly anyway, the Xenological Institute of Advanced Species Studies was left to contemplate a new addition to its archives. The first recorded case of human mythology being debunked by the simple expedient of humans showing up and proving it wasn't mythology at all. Professor Velnosian's lecture notes were quietly filed away as a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming that just because something seems impossible, it actually is, because the universe, it turned out, had a sense of humor about such assumptions, and wasn't above making its point with the kind of dramatic irony that would make even the most pretentious literature professor weep with envy. In the end, the only myth thoroughly debunked that day was the idea that humans were anything less than exactly as impossible as their legends had always claimed. And somewhere in the depths of space, a small glowing energy parasite named Sparky pulsed contentedly, proof that in the universe's grand design, even the most dangerous things could find a home, if a human decided they were worth keeping. If this story gave you chills, you haven't seen anything yet. Every week, we bring you the most epic, the most impossible, the most jaw-dropping human stories the galaxy has ever witnessed. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications, because humanity is just getting started. Bell subscribe for daily HFY content, and never miss the moment humans prove the universe wrong again.